И определимся тогда, там объем микродисцектомии или стабилизация будет? Война
The war is terrible. The doctor, like no one else, understands this.
это невозможно.
It's impossible in today's world. In the name of what?
Немножко иначе
Medicine works differently in wartime.
Ты знаешь, это как бы новая реальность.
You know, this is a new reality, and at some point you accept it. And you know what happened.
Ты выполняешь ту миссию,
You are on a mission for which you have been preparing all your life, and which is now most in demand, most needed.
Меня зовут Алексей.
My name is Alexey. I am neurosurgeon.
вот то, с чего мы начали, вот, о том, как
We're talking about how each of us met this war. This is probably the biggest turning point.
переломный момент. Хотя для меня, на самом деле, переломный момент, там, знаешь, как для доктора.
Although for me as a doctor, everything happened much earlier. Because when you are just a civilian doctor, you work according to scheme, somehow ordinary. It doesn't feel like that. You are just doing your job. Elective surgery, sometimes emergency surgery, but this is civil time surgery.
Хирургия и эта работа военная.
Everyday surgery and wartime surgery are completely different. 2014 was a turning point for me. There was a revolution in Kiev, revolution of unity. Victims began to come to us.
Пострадавшие прямо
Victims straight from Maidan Square. That's when I first saw what war is. My life is really divided into two parts. This surgery is completely different. In extreme conditions, these were wounded people who came in continuously.
везли один за одним, их было очень много.
There were a lot of them. That's when you start to remember your military training. You begin to understand that these are the stages of evacuation, primary allocation for seriously wounded, for the less affected people, and for people who need urgent help.
Нужна ургентная помощь. Тогда, в этот
In that moment,
я
I realized that a doctor
врач
can
может
also
работать
work
еще и
this
так.
way.
И вот сейчас, вот в это время,
24th of
после 24
February
числа,
was like
это
a
был для
flashback
меня
from
такой
2014.
отсылка к тому,
Everything was
14 году,
renewed,
всё возобновилось,
everything
всё
was
повторилось.
repeated.
Я не
I
думал,
didn't
что
think that
в моей
in my
жизни
life
придется
I
так
experienced such events
дважды
twice.
пережить вот такие события. То есть ты смотришь СМИ, ты
We watched the media. They show Russian military trainings. We saw how the situation was accumulating there,
но да нет, ну не может быть.
but no one believed until the last. We thought that it's all manipulation, but in fact, it has become a reality. Minimal rustle, and you turn around, you look around, it will remain for a long time in us. And for those who have experienced it deeply, it will remain for life.
Жизнь. Да мы еще это все увидим, мне кажется.
I think we will see it again when time passes, and this rollback syndrome, these stresses, and these traumas will begin to apply. And we will watch the recovery of these shocked people.
Восстанавливаются. Мне кажется, каждый из нас, каждый доктор,
Each of us, especially a doctor, is even more against the war than civilians,
даже чем другие, потому что он знает, насколько тяжело.
because we know how hard it is to maintain human health, how much effort does it take, and how much human life is worth.
Помочь человеку и насколько цена человеческая жизнь. Мы и так
In our regular life, we constantly think about it and constantly see it. When the war starts and we see suffering of people,
что люди страдают не
it's not an accident. This is the purposeful destruction of one person by another, and it's terrible.
направленное истребление одного человека другим, это еще более.
This feeling completely permits you, causes anger,
Ты начинаешь еще больше злиться, еще больше понимать.
and you understand even more that war is terrible. The doctor understands this like no one else. And it doesn't matter who you provide medical assistance to, it's just injured person.
Иногда эти операции могут длиться там
Often these operations go several hours. You offer a lot of effort, but it doesn't always bring the desired result. And then it's even more disappointing.
это тебя разочаровывает. Да, это просто тяжело.
It's just hard, not only physically. We are used to doing complex and lengthy surgeries every day, especially our neurosurgical operations.
Продолжительные максимально и непростые. Но когда речь идет о войне,
But when it comes to war and the horrors of war, at some point your efforts seem meaningless. The doctor evaluates the war from this side too, especially when it comes to a specific person who becomes a cripple for the rest of his life. At such moments, you understand that all the efforts that you made can just save a life, but not quality of this life.
конечно, прежде всего мы думаем там о наших защитниках, это ясно.
Of course, first of all, we think about our defenders. We do our best for help them. Generally, we see it that way, at least I.
По крайней мере, я. 3-4 дня до этого я купил
3-4 days before the war, I bought a couple of canisters and filled them with fuel. The situation was heating up and unstable. I thought that first of all, fuel might be needed. And so it happened. I had a few moments when I had to fill the car from a canister.
прямо оттуда заправлял машину. Только ты или именно ты сейчас можешь и должен
Only you and no one else should do this job, because human life is at the stake, and there is nothing more important than that.
ощущение ценности человеческой жизни. Ты выполняешь ту миссию, которой
You are fulfilling the mission that you have been preparing all your life, and which is now the most in demand, most needed.
в этом ее смысл. И это, кстати говоря, один из критериев.
By the way, this is one of the reasons why people leave medicine, because they don't feel this readiness in themselves.
Как бы жертвовать собой, своим временем и
They're not ready to sacrifice their time and much. In the name of what? Not everyone is ready to do this job, and many leave medicine for this reason as well.
многие уходят из медицины, в том числе и по этой причине, потому что
Because the social demand is high, but the implementation unfortunately isn't. But now, of course, it's completely different.
конечно, это совершенно иначе.
Не все могут получить помощь адекватную.
Not everyone can get adequate medical care. We have to move from city to city. There are many calls from internal refugees who cannot get the necessary help. For the last 2 months, we have been working in different regions.
Едем дальше.
Okay, let's go.
Особенность боевой травмы военного
A feature of military trauma in wartime is that it is a combined trauma, so it can be not only a head injury, and a multidisciplinary approach is important here. In such cases, 2-3 teams often work at the same time. We take into account the involvement of the abdomen, chest and extremities.
полостью, грудная клетка и конечности здесь.
In this situation work general surgery and orthopedic traumatologists, but neurosurgeons are in demand in the first place.
От них действительно много зависит. Есть еще такой один аспект.
There is another aspect. When all the stages of evacuation, first aid, triage of patients and so on go through,
Медицинская сортировка пациентов и так далее. На этом же не заканчивается.
nothing ends here. Then begins the care and the first steps. Soon we will see the next stage. This is the information and preservation of the quality of life. At these stages of neurosurgery will be most in demand.
Будут максимально востребованы, потому что кто как
Basically, a neurosurgeon deals with reconstructive operations. Let's take peripheral nerves as an example. Now we see this very often, with damage to the limbs, with loss of spinal cord function, with combat injuries.
функции спинного мозга, реконструктивные операции на позвоночнике.
Cranioplasty, closure of skull defects, and more. This will be long enough.
Будет достаточно долго еще. Мы видели таких пациентов много, которых
We have already seen such patients before. They were brought from the JFO zone, but there weren't as many as there are now. There is one more feature.
не было, и будет еще немало, безусловно. Поэтому в этом, кстати говоря, еще такая интересная.
We have organized and aimed at the hostilities that are now taking place. But there are no fewer ordinary patients with chronic diseases, and when the situation stabilizes, there will be even more of them than before the war.
А я думаю, что когда ситуация более-менее стабилизируется, их даже будет больше, чем до войны.
Now there are also many civilians, those who were injured, hiding from missile attacks, and those who were engaged in volunteer activities. These people are often financially incapable.
В частных клиниках, где я работаю и так далее,
In many private clinics, and in the one where I work, such people are being treated. At times like this, it's not about the money. Most of the time, it's not about the money. Our medical task is to carry out the humanitarian mission. even if these victims are not military.
Того, что, казалось бы, это не просто не пострадавшие, не военные. Кто бы мог подумать, что там мы будем знать.
We couldn't even think that we would know how cruise missiles work and what types of them there are. Now it's already our life. It already accompanies us inalienably.
Кто-то призвался в тероборону.
Someone goes to territorial defense. Someone volunteered. Someone now does their work in military hospitals.
В условиях там военных госпиталей.
Someone just volunteered and doesn't go into medicine because they are more in demand in something else.
Больше востребован именно как там.
But everyone is here. They are all in Ukraine. I talked with Tatiana. She is our operating sister. She was able to go home only after a month and a half to do household chores. She operated around the clock. They slept and lived there. There were constant rocket attacks, constant bombing, and it was 24/7. We heard it. Injured and wounded people were constantly coming in.
Поступали пострадавшие. Ночью бомбежки.
Night bombings, against the backdrop of ongoing artillery cannonade. It felt like it was very close.
Вот совсем рядом. Это же было и здесь, когда это было Дарниц.
It was here, Darnitsky district, Obolon. Subversive groups penetrated the city and fought. Certainly not like in the suburbs. Everything could be very, very bad. This thought don't leave me.
Вот эта мысль, конечно, она не дает покоя. Немножко иначе работает медицина.
Medicine works differently in wartime. During the evacuation phases, casualties are taken to nearby civilian hospitals. Patients come there. They receive first aid and urgent surgical. At the moment when patients become transportable, they are transferred to rear hospitals. There they restored or repeated surgery, highly specialized or reconstructive.
Либо реконструктивную, либо узкоспециализированную хирургию. Специфика нейрохирурга в том, что он...
The specificity of neurosurgeon in the fact that he has experience in all areas. Typically, a neurosurgeon or traumatologist or general surgeon turns into emergency surgeon in wartime. We must have developed the maximum number of surgical skills which allow you to perform any surgical intervention.
По сути, любое хирургическое вмешательство. Я все не мог понять, думал, как так получается, что...
Previously, I couldn't understand how it happens that after the explosion, the tank turret is located separately from the tank. Why is this happening? It turns out that when the detonation occurs, the turret flies out like a cork from a bottle.
И я могу себе представить мощность.
I can imagine the power of this process. Moreover, at this moment, there are people inside. It excites the imagination.
Да, это будоражит воображение. Мы же это все видим.
At first, we see all this on TV screens and in the news feed. It's like it's not with us. It's not real, even when everyone around is talking about it.
Даже когда все об этом говорят. Но когда ты становишься прям невольным участником.
But when you become an unwitting participant in these events, then of course you penetrate fully. They say that you can get used to everything, but it's not true. It's impossible. It's constant stress.
Невозможно, это постоянно стресс. Ты знаешь, это как бы новая реальность, и ты в какой-то момент...
This is our new reality. At some point, you accept it, and you understand that it happened. I think that the main thing is not be disappointed. Don't stop. Because it's very depressing for everyone. We are all in a news feed. We are watching what is happening, how people suffer, how the army fights. At some point, you get very tired of it. Of course, it is necessary to be mentally prepared, not to panic, but be sure to remember the war is on. It has not ended.
Этой энергии, которая запустила...
The energy that launched these deep processes is still enough for more destructive processes. Anything else can happen. This is a temporary pause, payment in blood, for escalating the situation that has been accumulating for so long.
Я не знаю, то ли это действительно...
I don't know. Maybe these are the turns of history that work that way. Now there is even more personal aggression, and this complicates and further fuels hatred.
Усложняет и усугубляет. спокойного сна нет.
There is no restful sleep. Restful sleep only when you have not slept for 2 or 3 days. The body simply turns off, unable to further reflection. Due to the fact that I didn't have a family near me, I took them out at the beginning. First of all, I dream of children.
Вот мои дети постоянно снились. Это такая.
My children constantly dreamed, and there are not enough around.
Но когда пропаганда использует
When propaganda uses the specifics of our psychology and imperceptibly for us systematically imposes images and points of view, in this sense, we are just machines. Don't succumb to provocations and preserve humanism in yourself is a primary thing. Concepts of good and evil, and nothing justify war. No amount of propaganda should justify war. No substitution of concepts should justify war and destruction. This is what you need to keep.
никакая подмена понятий не должна оправдать войну.
Preserving the monuments and the memory of the fallen is very important. In order to not to repeat this, it is necessary to maintain the understanding there is nothing worse than war, there is nothing worse than destruction.
Почему, по сути, весь цивилизованный
We and the entire civilized world don't solve the problems through the war. It's not a way to prove anything. Nobody does it by force, but it turned out that it's possible.
этого не делает. Разные мысли на этот счет о том, что
This decision is attributed to only one dictator. It's not like that at all.
и так далее. Да нет. Очень многие люди там
Many people, on the other hand, approve and support such a path. They understand or think that this is the only way to prove anything. But the whole civilized world says no, the price of human life is much greater.
Почему так происходит? Ну,
It happens because someone is more developed and someone is less. I have analyzed and discussed this with many people. I believe that Ukraine is more civilized than other conditionally developed countries.
многие европейские и условно развитые страны.
Maybe because during this time I had to endure so many terrible things.
Я когда воочию увидел вот этот
I personally saw the areas after the occupation. It was terrible. It makes you re-evaluate everything. It makes you realize
представляете, переоценить это невозможно в современном мире.
that this is not possible in today's world. It is impossible for us. We can't accept it, but they can.
А они могут. Знаешь, я впервые увидел вот так вот реально.
The first time I saw tanks moving around the city, I decided to evacuate my family.
И они окопались на подъездах к городу.
Our troops were preparing to take the fight. At that moment, I felt like the situation was too dangerous.
Я думаю, что это просто одурманенный народ.
I think it's just zombie people, but this doesn't relieve them of responsibility. There are a lot of them there.
Вот эта милитаризация, которая
The militarization that took place there for a long time played a key role, and if they didn't have such a military potential, they would have to look for other arguments.
оказалась, как оказалось. Вот эта пресловутая обезьяна с
It
гранатом.
turned out that it's like a monkey with a grenade, and no arguments.
Они сами попались, опять же, на своей пропаганде. И
They fell into the trap of their propaganda, the fact that this is an incredibly strong army with incredible potential.
с невероятным потенциалом. История показывает,
History shows that there are no invincible armies. Sooner or later, everything ends. I'm sure that this war will end exactly like the others. It will end with the internal defeat of their regime. It will inevitably happen.
неизбежно просто произойдет.
Я не курил до этого 15 лет.
I hadn't smoked for 15 years before. It was like yesterday.
Помнились те времена, когда
It reminded me of my students' days, when there wasn't enough money to buy cigarettes. I had to buy something cheap and strong. Now the other extreme. There is simply nowhere to buy cigarettes.
нечего было купить, практически и негде.
No, I have never smoked an electronic cigarettes. Either tobacco is the choice of the real man.
Дело для настоящего мужчины.
Проблемы с осанкой есть у всех, мне кажется.
I think everyone has posture problems. Lack of regular exercise, unhealthy lifestyle, and so on. But this is not a problem in understanding of neurosurgeon. This is not a neurosurgical aspect.
Хирургических аспектов. Постоянные, ну, минимальные какие-то упражнения.
I recommend regular minimal exercises to strengthen the body. This is not necessarily physiotherapy exercises that aren't interesting to perform. I recommend just going to the gym to keep fit.
или еще что-то. Ну, то есть просто поддержание физической формы, все. Никто не сможет...
No one can overcome genetics if there is a predisposition. It will not be possible to overcome something difficult or chronic. Regular physical exercises will help you keep your health in good condition. It seems easy, but it's at the hardest part. Every time I say this to people who have undergone surgery. But as soon as they solve their problem, now medicine allows you to quickly solve problem, they immediately forget about it.
активному образу жизни, они сразу об этом забывают. Вспоминаю часто пациента, который
I often think of an elderly patient.
постоянно был...
He underwent minimally invasive procedures,
И он говорит, ну, Алексей Андреевич,
and he always asked me, "Doctor, what should I do to recover? Maybe quit smoking?"
курить или еще что-то. Или вот ничего не меняйте в своей жизни.
I answer, "Don't change anything in your life. Just keep everything as it is." Because I understand that it's not easy for young people to change their lifestyles. But for older people, it's much more difficult to do this. I have to repeat it over and over. Nothing special, a healthy lifestyle, prevention of excess weight, and so on.
Ничего особенного. Профилактика лишнего веса и так далее. Все, что созидательно,
Everything that is creative is primary. Nothing started from destruction. There is such an astrophysical concept of entropy. It is very well implemented in our life. We understand that along with creative processes, there are destructive processes. This applies to everything, from small to large. We talked about catabolism in the body and about entropy in our lives. This is the opposite of creativity. These processes will always take place. Our task is to get ahead of them and create more.
созидая больше. Психосоматики очень много.
There are a lot of psychosomatics, high level of anxiety in society. This is due to the high speeds of life, the flow of information, and the latest events. The nervous system is constantly forced to defend itself. The psyche comes up with some alternative problem and develop it further. Patients trying to find natural aspect in the emotional state. Some vein is compressed, some nerve is pinched.
Какой-то нерв зажат или еще что-то. Хотя по факту это
But in reality, it's just an increased level of anxiety. I often see patients who come for checkups with large folders of medical history. I constantly hear, "Doctor, we have already examined everything. No one can help us." In such cases, I understand that good antidepressants and the help of a psychologist are needed.
опять же пресловутая физическая активность.
Again, physical activity, and then the patient jumps out of this problem. Of course, often these problems don't arise out of nowhere. Everyone has some kind of a problem, but people tend to exaggerate it, and the basis is a psychosomatic disorder. However, patients with real organic problems are often psychologically unstable.
А вообще пациенты,
This is usually accompanied by pain.
они всегда еще отчасти, конечно, и психологически нестабильны.
Pain greatly depletes the mechanism of the nervous system. Often it becomes independent disease.
Системы, вот, и часто становится отдельным вообще заболеванием.
There is such a thing as a chronic pain syndrome. Due to the constant irritation of subcortical structures, a stagnant focus of excitation is formed there. Very often it is possible to eliminate the cause, but the patient continues to feel pain.
Уже убрать причину, а пациент еще испытывает боль. Вот это очень сложная категория
This
пациентов.
is a difficult category of patients. Such patients need not only to be operated on, but also to be accompanied by medicine for a long time. Rehabilitologists and psychologists are involved in working with such patients.
И есть такая специальность, как реабилитологи, которые...
There is such a specialty, rehabilitologist. They not only write the training program, they also show how to do the exercises. This is a kind of a culture of sports in life. Every sport has its downsides. Swimming is really good for the spine and the whole body, but only a few of us know the right level of exercises. How to do the exercises correctly to get a positive result. 90% of my patients who are recommended to go to the pool, they don't get the desired effect.
Они получают того эффекта, который нужен. А в основном это пошел...
Basically, it goes like this. A person goes to the pool, the water is cold there, the person gets hypothermia, then it takes a long time to warm up under a warm shower. After this event, you can get an exacerbation. Only if you do it right. When they come out of the water, steam comes out of their bodies.
От них пар идет. Вот это правильная нагрузка. Самый простой вариант.
The easiest option is elementary exercises at home, push-ups, abdominal exercises, not heavy dumbbells. This is more than enough to keep you healthy.
Пресса, это там какие-то базовые гантели. В особенности, вот как это ни парадоксально,
I'm surprised that people don't talk about it much. Lack of sleep, not regular sleep, lack of rest. In this case, first of all, the musculoskeletal system suffers, and in general, the body doesn't recover.
в целом организм не восстанавливается. Почему? Потому что опорно-двигательная...
Because the musculoskeletal system is a system with underestimated metabolism. Metabolic processes in bone and cartilage structures proceed as slowly as possible. Therefore, in a state of relaxation, at night they receive maximum nutrition.
Ночью они получают основное питание. Сама по себе физическая активность...
Physical activity and sports exercises are 50% of success. If this combined with a good healthy sleep, it becomes a prevention of spine and joints. The main thing is to give a rest and get necessary nutrition.
Это очень важный момент, дать восстановиться организму и получить питание. Тут даже полезнее было бы, скажем так...
You can say it would be right not to go to the pool, but get a good sleep in time.
Вот я, знаешь, что я люблю игровые виды?
I like sports games. It is both exercise and relaxation and entertainment. This is so cool. Basketball, football, cricket. The main thing to remember is safety and the fact that it can be traumatic when you get excited.
Для того, чтобы сжигать достаточное количество калорий, тебе нужно...
In order to burn enough calories, you need to include the sufficient number of muscle groups. A muscle isn't just some abstract spring. The muscle must contract and metabolize energy. It must be turned on, and it must not be injured. You can't give enough load and enough energy at once. I never counted operations until it was required for marketing. I saw an example of this somewhere, and it became interesting to me. In this sense, we are just like a mechanism that needs to be prepared for correct use.
Правильно эксплуатировать, подготовить его к правильной нагрузке. Наверное, лет 5 назад я задался целью, поднял...
About 5 years ago, I started my surgical activity.
У меня получилось около 10 тысяч операций.
I counted about 10,000 operations and didn't count after that. I don't think the number has doubled, but it certainly has increased a lot.
Достаточное количество добавилось операций, то есть много. Был такой некий вакуум в нашей специальности.
There was a certain vacuum and there was a high demand in our specialty. I simultaneously operated in several clinics in Kiev.
Были дни, когда я просто не снимал хирургический костюм.
There were days when it seemed to me that I didn't take off my surgical suit when moving from clinic to clinic. When I returned home in the evening, I realized that I had operated in 4 different hospitals. It also happened.
Мне всегда нравилась вот такая некоторая эстетика.
I always liked a certain aesthetics. I always try something new in medicine. To work as a surgeon is an interesting in its own way. To engage in educational activities is a little different. Especially in the context of the media, this is even more relevant.
Немножечко другое. У меня даже были такие проекты, в принципе, есть.
I have projects for which we involve artists. The artist comes into operating room, looks around and take a photo. Then he creates sketches.
Вот, а потом это выполняет прямо в материале. О этой специальности, о работе врача.
It seems to me that more people see and know about what we do, the more detailed understanding of medicine they will have. Very often I come across the opinion that medicine has been commercialized. It's just like any other job. I don't see anything wrong with it.
Как и в любой другой работе. Но мне бы хотелось...
I want to convey to the maximum number of people the concept of the humanitarian mission of a doctor. This work is not only about the money. This is a specific job. On the issue of culture, once we faced the problem of shortage of good medical illustrators. We studied this issue and it turned out that in Ukraine we don't train specialists like this. When I met illustrator Joe Hoven, he explained to me that there is a certain specialty for which he is studying, medical illustrator. He has done several jobs for us. We have illustrated our articles with his works. This is great. I believe that this is a matter of aesthetics in medicine. Why not? The stages of the operation are illustrated by a professional artist. These are the hidden aspects of our specialty.
Это класс. Поэтому это все вот эти вот аспекты нашей специальности.
Medicine is maximally integrated into society. This applies to almost everything. The more common ground we find, the more interesting it is for the general public.
Таких соприкосновений мы находим. Я бы так сказал, что мы становимся
I want to say that we are becoming more developed culturally. We have a broad understanding of the subject, because a lot of people live in some kind of stereotypes. This is clearly seen in medicine. In some sense, medicine is a private club.
Со стороны общества есть некоторая такая, часто чувствуется агрессия сейчас.
Part of society is often felt some kind of aggression towards medicine. First of all, everything is very complicated and takes a long time to change in the minds of people.
Когда-то мы принесли в операционную...
Once we brought a music player into the operating room. The operation is very long and we turn on the music that played in the background. I remember this band. We were told, you need to get this tape recorder out of here, because it's in the sterile area. Then we joke about it. Don't worry, we have sterile music, so he can stay here.
Музыка, все нормально, он может здесь находиться. То есть это в головах у людей.
It's all in people's heads. I want to tell another story.
Это, кстати говоря, уже более...
Once upon a time, we tried to make the stay of patients in a hospital more comfortable. We installed TV in the wards.
палатах. Я собирал людей и говорил, там, товарищи...
I gathered people and told them, colleagues, you need to make the patient feel just like at home in the hospital.
На меня смотрели эти медсестры,
A lot of people looked at me like I was crazy. They didn't understand. They asked me how. He's in the hospital. What does it mean?
А парадокс в том, что пациент в больницу...
But the patient in the hospital, and he feels so morally bad. And if you still remind him of this, treat him carelessly, all this in a hospital with poor repairs, this only makes it worse for him.
состоянии ему еще морально тяжелее. Так вот, задача именно в том, чтобы...
The task is to create the most comfortable conditions, because as a person is under maximum stress. The medical staff couldn't figure it out. This stereotype was in us so deeply.
Персонал не мог этого понять. Настолько этот стереотип глубоко был в нас. Мы застали еще то время, когда...
We remember the time when in trains passengers were placed on 3 shelves.
Реально было 3 полки. Ну, то есть... Первая, вторая,
First, second, third, all seats were used. All the time, it was not about comfort at all. It was not about the quality of life. It was only about achieving some global goal, by any means. And often, this happened at the expense of health.
здоровья. То есть хорошо, что сейчас люди... Вот, я об этом и говорил, что...
Now everything is much better. I always say, Ukraine has had European values for a long time. We don't notice this and underestimate it, but in fact, it has already happened.
Тот уровень там демократии, который у нас есть, который...
The level of democracy that we have allows us to live at very high level.
Там, ну и так еще там лет 15 назад у меня было такое
Even 15 years ago, when I came abroad for an internship, I had the impression that we were incredibly behind in the development from civilized countries.
Оно во многом и сохраняется на самом деле.
In many ways, this feeling still remains with me, but there is a difference.
Оборудование, насыщение оборудованием достаточно активно.
For example, there is an active feeling of equipment, but the development and effective use is not so good. I'll tell you this, we have all the most necessary equipment.
Необходимое, и многое у нас действительно есть, да.
Of course, these are not always the latest devices. Often this is equipment that was used in Europe, and then it came to us.
Все равно, так или иначе, мы не можем быть...
We cannot be at the forefront, because medicine, at all times and in all countries, has been subsidized. The state has a priority in a separate article, the financing of medicine.
Имеет отдельную статью финансирования медицины, и она всегда в приоритете.
Therefore, all the newest and most modern equipment first enters the United States and Europe, tested there, then used everywhere. Then we master it. And after all of this, the equipment is delivered to us in Ukraine.
Все есть, все возможно.
In any case, there is a slightly delay interval. Everything is there, everything is used, everything is mastered.
Опыт работы
Now we have accumulated vast experience in working with the spine. We perform almost the entire range of possible operations.
это начиная от базовых
starting with the elimination of problems with the acute chondrosis, removal of herniated discs, other degenerative diseases, injuries and fractures of the spine, reconstructive operations, neuro-oncology with damage to the primary and secondary nervous systems, resection, prosthetics.
Есть первичное либо вторичное поражение опорных систем позвоночника, и опять же это и резекция.
On all departments, starting with the cervical, ending with the sacral and coccygeal, often this operation involved large and complex instruments.
И так далее. Операции, так называемой хирургии 360.
For example, the installation of stabilization systems and prosthetics of the spine, Operation Surgery 360. Now all methods of surgical interventions are mastered in full.
То есть в этом смысле освоены практически все возможные виды хирургических вмешательств. Никто не приходит в хирургию сразу со всеми навыками.
No one comes to surgery with ready-made skills. First, these skills are passed from hand to hand during surgical operations. As you learn basic techniques and skills, you grow as a specialist. I remember my stages of development well.
Я просто помню вот свою эту этапность развития как специалиста. Это было вот так вот step by step. Сначала ты делаешь
Everything went step by step. You do basic surgery, like a discectomy. Further, operation gradually become more complicated. Operation on the thoracic region, neck and anterior approach.
У меня, в частности, ну, я думаю, в жизни каждого спинального хирурга, это
And all this led to the most difficult reconstructive operations. Severe spinal deformity, scoliotic spinal deformity. In such operations, you should use the maximum amount of surgical technique during one operation.
Поэтому это очень долгая операция, вот, наверное, максимально сложная.
These are very long operations and very complex. It is a process of gradually mastering and applying new technologies and tactics. That's why I say 1, 2 or 3,000 operations is not enough to become a highly skilled surgeon.
Мы говорим о том, что там 1, 2, 3 тысячи операций недостаточно для хирурга, чтобы освоить что-то такое серьезное.
This constant needs to be given time. It is a regular practice. It is impossible to stop a few months, do nothing, and then continue without losing skills. It takes several decades to do the same thing regularly in order to operate the patient as efficiently as possible.
Максимально эффективно прооперировать пациента, человека. Помню первую операцию, это не банальный вопрос.
Yes, I remember my first operation. This is not a banal question. It was like the first time something memorable happened. Everyone has experienced this in their lives. It is impossible to forget. For the first time I saw through the eyepiece of microscope the work of a neurosurgeon. It was a very nice visual component.
Меня, как человека, для которого вот визуальный компонент очень важный, визуальная составляющая, это было очень красиво. То есть я поймал
Before
себя
that,
на
I
мысли о
thought,
том, что
how can a surgical wound be beautiful or ugly? But in the light of surgical microscope, it was simply mesmerizing. I will remember this image for the rest of my life.
Микрохирургическая работа. Вот эту операцию я запомнил на всю свою жизнь.
And I'm not tired of neurosurgery. I can't say I have mastered everything or I have nothing more to strive for. Microdiscectomy is a common spinal operation, removal of hernia of the spine under a microscope. That's where I started, the simplest.
Вот. Ну вот с этого я начинал.
The picture that I saw captivated me. After that, I decided to become a neurosurgeon. My specialty is my life. That's the whole story.
Моя специальность — это моя жизнь. Вот в чем вся история. Хорошо, слушай, классно, мне понравилось.